Okay, guys, let's see what happens and let's see if they somehow save Uncle Beasley. We're going to finish the book today. So it's chapter 16 and 17 is what we have left. So let's see what happens. When I woke up the next morning, I had that kind of gloomy feeling you get when you think something bad is likely to happen. I tried to go back to sleep again, but I couldn't. I looked up at the calendar on the wall where I'd been crossing off the days. Today was Wednesday, October 2nd. And that meant I would have to go back to school in 5 more days. And then I thought if they were going to kill Uncle Beasley, I wouldn't want to stay around here when they did that. And so I'd better go back to freedom and go back to school and just try to forget about the whole thing. But it would be awful going back to school before I was supposed to, and everyone would ask what the matter was, and I have to keep explaining to people all the time, and I sure wouldn't enjoy that very much. When everything was gone all wrong and luck's all against you, you don't feel like going around talking about it. Well, I went in to see if Dr. Zemer was awake, and he was shaving. "Good morning, Nate," he said. "How about running down to the store and getting a quart of milk and a loaf of bread? And while you're at it, pick up a newspaper, will you? I want to see how Senator Granderson is getting along." I was back in a few minutes. The doctor was setting the table. "Read me the news while I make the toast," he said. He stuck a fork into a slice of bread and held it over the gas flame on the stove. I turned the news about Congress. Dinosaur bill debated in Senate. Washington, October 4th. The Senate wrangled until a late hour last night over the bill proposed by Senator Granderson. This bill, if made law, will outlaw all dinosaurs from the United States. Senator Tarboy spoke in favor of the bill and proposed an amendment to the effect that the present dinosaur be stuffed as at government expense and presented to Senator Granderson. Senator Tarboy is a member of the Committee on Economy and the Government. Senator Granderson said he objected to the dinosaur because it was wasting the taxpayers' money and because it was inefficient and out of date. "Our country has no use for things that have become extinct," Senator Granderson declared. A small group of senators have protested the dinosaur bill, as it is called, but they have made little headway. Unless something unforeseen happens in the next 2 or 3 days, it is very likely that the dinosaur bill will pass both houses, and the world's only living dinosaur will go to join his extinct ancestors. The doctor didn't say anything for a while. He finished buttering his toast and then he poured out his coffee and stirred it with a butter knife. I had the only spoon because I needed it for my eggs. We kept meaning to buy another spoon and fork, but we only thought of it at breakfast time. "Don't worry about me," Dr. Zemer said. "Out in the field, on fossil hunting expeditions, I've stirred my coffee with everything from a toothbrush to screwdrivers, and the coffee always tastes the same." He took a swallow of the coffee and then he pointed to the paper. "Doesn't look at all good, does it?" "Well, I didn't think Congress wouldn't help us much anyway." "I guess that's about the end of it then," I said. I swallowed a few times, then I said, "I might as well start packing my suitcase. I don't want to be around when they take Uncle Beasley out and shoot him." "Hold on, Nate," the doctor said. "We're not going to give up that easily. We still have another card to play." "What is it?" I said. "Do you mean like we might steal him away from the zoo like the way I said last night?" "No, no, Nate. We must be legal about this. I think we've got a much better way than that. What is it that keeps a senator going, do you think?" "His lungs, I guess," I said. "Well, that helps all right, but what's he got to have before he can even get into the Senate?" I couldn't see what he was driving at. I give up. "What's he got to have?" "Why, votes," the doctor said. "Unless people vote for him, a senator is nothing at all." "Well, I didn't vote for Senator Granderson," I said. "But he's right in there just the same, and I can't tell other people how to vote, can I?" "That's just it," Dr. Zimmer said. "I think you can tell them." "Who, me? I'm not old enough to vote myself." "But you're old enough to ask people to write to their congressman." Dr. Zimmer looked over at me and poured himself another cup of coffee. I didn't think much of that idea. How was I going to tell all these people to write to their congressman what was I going to do? Stand out on the street corner and shout to everybody? I didn't see how that was going to work, and I told Dr. Zemer so. "No, you don't have to stand on the street corner," he said. "You can tell them on TV. I know a man named Bonelli who has a little television program every week. It's called Capitol Sidelight. He tries to show people all over the country what's going on here in Washington, and he gets people that are in the news to speak on his program. It's pretty good." "But what's that got to do with us?" I said. "It has everything to do with us. Mr. Bonelli called me up this morning while you were out, and he wondered if you would like to give a talk on this show. He wanted to have something about the dinosaur bill this week. And since you've known the dinosaur better than anyone else, you're the logical person to talk about it. But I've never been on a TV show before. I wouldn't know what to do. Oh, that's all right, Dr. Zemer said. It's perfectly simple. And remember, it may be our only chance to save Uncle Beasley. But couldn't you do the talking? I'd asked. You know what to say and everything. You could tell them how important Uncle Beasley was for science. I'm afraid that wouldn't work, Nate. People don't really care what happens to science, and they're not going to take much trouble to save a dinosaur just so a lot of silly scientists can study him. But if it's a matter of taking a boy's pet away from him, well, they can get pretty excited about that. As far as I can see, you're Uncle Beasley's only hope. I thought about that for a while. I could just imagine talking on a television program, but if I had to do it to save my dinosaur, well, then I just had to do it. Okay, I said. I guess I can try anyhow. Fine, the doctor said. Now, Mr. Benelli wanted us to come over to the studio this morning and we could talk over what you're going to say on the program, all right? Yes, I said, but I wasn't any too sure about it. We went over to the studio and his secretary showed us Mr. Benelli's office. He was a short, quick little man, and he kept walking up and down the room all the time. He shook his hands with me and had me sit in a big leather chair. Now then, he said, walking back and forth all the time he was talking, I understand that you used to keep this dinosaur in your backyard. I nodded. Was he fierce? Did he ever hurt you? Oh, no, I said. He was just as gentle as anything. He just ate and slept and walked around. Only he was a little shy with other people. But I understand you had some trouble with the truck here in Washington. I think the B-2 just flew by. Is that right? That was because the truck driver was in such a hurry that he blew his horn right in the dinosaur's ear. He never did like it when people blew their. I see, Mr. Benelli said. Was he expensive to feed? Not while we fed him on grass. That didn't cost us anything up in Freedom. It just grows wild all around there. That was Freedom, New Hampshire, wasn't it? Tell me about your family. Got any brothers or sisters? What does your father do? How do you like Washington? He went on asking questions like that, and I answered them the best I could. Finally, he stopped and held up his hand. All right, he said. I guess that gives us enough to go on. Now I'll work this up into a little talk for you and have the secretary type it up, and you can read it when your turn comes in the program. You come around about 7 this evening, and that will give you time to read over your talks and get all set. Is the program tonight? I groaned. Gosh, I won't even have time to worry about it. Mr. Benelli laughed and showed us out of the office. Well, I had one awful day. Whenever I thought about talking on the TV show, I got cold quivers down my back, and my stomach would go all queer. I couldn't hardly eat any lunch. What with thinking about the program, and what would happen if I got all mixed up and couldn't say things straight. I never was any good at public speaking. I only had a couple of crackers for supper, and they didn't set too easy. Everybody gets that way right before their first speech, Dr. Zemer told me. Just remember that once you start talking, everything will be all right. The bad part is before the talking. We got over to the studio, and Mr. Benelli gave me a typewritten sheet, and we read over it. It was a pretty good speech, I guess, better than I could do, but it wasn't my speech. Somehow it didn't seem quite right for me to talk somebody else's words like that, and it didn't say anything about how I wanted to save Uncle Beasley. Mr. Benelli had me read it a few times, and he told me to be sure to talk slowly and clearly, and then he looked at his watch and said, we ought to be in the studio at 5 minutes to 8. My stomach sort of caved in when I heard that, but I swallowed hard and kind of nodded to him, and he went out. Dr. Zemer looked over me and smiled. That speech isn't quite what you wanted to say, is it? No, I said, I guess not. What do you really want to tell them? Do you know? Well, sure, I want to tell them that I like my dinosaur and that I'm trying to save him, and they can help if they all tell their congressman that they don't want the dinosaur bill. Good, Dr. Zemer said. As long as you know what you really want to say, everything will be all right. I didn't see what he meant by that. At least not until later. The doctor came over to me, picked up my paper. He looked at it for a while, and then he walked into the next room with it. He came back again in a minute and handed me the paper all folded up. Put it in your pocket until the program begins, he said. I put it in my pocket. A few minutes later, Mr. Benelli stuck his head in the door. "Let's go," he said. I followed him into the studio. We sat down at a table that was a big camera on wheels and some awful bright lights that made me blink. Mr. Benelli pointed to an electric clock on the wall. It was about 2 minutes before 8. "We begin at 8, he said, "and your part comes about 10 minutes later. Are you all set? Got your speech?" I put my hand in my pocket. I felt the paper and I nodded to him. Mr. Benelli turned toward the camera and smiled, and just as the red second hand on the clock touched 12, he started talking. "Good evening, friends," he said in a sort of smooth voice. "This is Ben Benelli, bringing you this week's Capital Sidelight. 15 minutes of news and views of the political scene here at your nation's capital. First of all, about our distinguished visitor from Peru, Senor Gasparillo Mendoza, arrived by plane yesterday afternoon and was greeted at the airport." I was too worried about myself to hear the rest of what Mr. Benelli said. I took the paper out of my pocket and opened it up. For a minute, I just stared. There wasn't any speech there at all. It was just a blank paper with a few words written in pencil. All it said was, "You know what to say, Nate. Go ahead and make your own speech." Well, I could have sunk there through the floor. Here it was almost time for me to read my speech, and I didn't have any speech to read. First, I thought I'd better crawl under the rug and hide, or maybe make a dash for the door. My hands felt like ice. They shook so I could hardly hold on to the paper. And then I heard Mr. Benelli say, "And we have him here in the studio with us tonight. This is Nathan Twitchell, the young man from Freedom, New Hampshire, who raised this dinosaur from the time it was hatched. Well, Nathan, would you like to say a few words to our audience?" Then he turned around and looked straight at me. My stomach flipped upside down and started climbing up in my throat. I opened my mouth, but I couldn't get any words to come out. And then I thought if I didn't say something pretty quick, there wouldn't be any more Uncle Beasley. That big old dinosaur depended on me, so I just had to start talking. So I looked straight at the camera, took a deep breath, and just said the first thing that came into my head. "Hello," I said. Out of the corner of my eye, I could see Mr. Benelli making signals for me to get going. Of course, I didn't know what the matter was, but I couldn't tell him right in the middle of the program like that. Hello, everybody," I said. "I'm Nathan Twitchell, and I live up in New Hampshire. And one morning last summer, I found this big egg in our chicken house. And when it hatched out, it was a dinosaur, and I took care of him and fed him grass all summer. And he got to be awful tame and friendly with me. But we couldn't keep him up there over the winter because he needed a warm place. And besides, he was getting pretty big for our little town. So we brought him down here to Washington. And then we gave him to the zoo because they've got just the right place for him. And people could come in and see him. And then when I thought everything was all set, some men in Congress thought they'd save money by getting rid of the dinosaur. They said he wasn't American and he was no good for anything. But that's not right. I found out at the museum that America is the only country that had ever had horned dinosaurs. They were all living out in Wyoming 60 million years ago. And that was even before the pilgrims landed, I guess. I could see Mr. Benelli wiggling his hands trying to get me to read the speech he'd written for me. I figured I'd better hurry up before he stopped me. And besides, I took care of the dinosaur. I fed him. I watched him grow big and strong, and I sure would hate to have him killed. I know he doesn't eat a lot, but maybe he's worth it because he's the only dinosaur we've got. He isn't any beauty, but I like him a lot. And I was just hoping that some of you people that are listening would want to save my dinosaur, though. Now he's really your dinosaur, too. And if you do want to save him, would you please tell your senators and representatives to vote against the dinosaur bill? But you better do it quick or there won't be anything left to save. Mr. Benelli broke in before I could say any more. He leaned over to the microphone and said, "Well, Nate, that was very interesting. We hope you enjoy Washington while you're here. Now that's all for the evening, folks. Be sure to tune in again next Thursday to Capital Sidelight, the program that brings you the people in the news in your nation's capital." The clock said exactly 15 minutes after 8 when he finished. Mr. Benelli turned to me and said, "Why in the name of goodness didn't you read the speech I gave you?" "I couldn't find it," I said. "When I opened the paper, it was just blank." "Well, look in your pockets. The speech must be there." I went through all my pockets, but no speech. You kids are always losing things. Every time I have a kid on my program, I swear that I'll never do it again. You give a kid a paper, and 30 seconds later, he loses it. And the funny thing is, you can't ever find it again. What do you do with them is a mystery to me. Dr. Zemer came over and took me by the arm. "I think Nate did very well," he said. "He had to make up his talk as he went along." "Oh, sure," Mr. Benelli said. "It was a fine speech, but it wasn't the one I wrote for him." I was going to have him just tell about his family and his town, what the dinosaur was like, and so on. I don't like to get tangled up with controversial issues in this program. Yes, I know, Dr. Zemer said. We said goodbye and went back to the apartment. When we got there, Dr. Zemer took a piece of paper out of his pocket and gave it to me. I opened it up. It was a speech Mr. Benelli wrote for me. Where'd you find this? I asked him. Oh, I kept it. I gave you a blank paper in exchange. Mr. Benelli's speech would have saved Uncle Beasley, but I think yours will. Mr. Benelli's speech wouldn't have saved Uncle Beasley, but I think yours will. I kept this one so you'd have to make your own, and you did. It was a good speech. Well, you sure gave me some bad moments. I almost passed out when I saw the blank sheet. He smiled and patted me on the back. I know, Nate. It was a terrible spot to put you in, but I couldn't think of any better way. Now let's hope it works. Nothing much happened until noon the next day. That was when we got a telephone call from Dr. Kennedy. Say, he said, that talk on TV was just the thing. I hear that telegrams have been coming in all morning. They've been coming in by the basket load. The whole Senate's flooded with telegrams, even all the way from Utah and Texas. They say, save the dinosaur. If things keep going on this way, the dinosaur bill is going to fall flat on its face. Dr. Zemer put down the telephone and broke into the broadest grin you've ever saw. And then he jumped and grabbed me by the arms, and we went sashaying round and round his desk. Right in the middle, the phone rang again. Hello, the doctor said. Hello, Zemer, the voice said. This is Holmquist at the zoo. Say, what's going on anyway? A whole crowd of people suddenly descended on us from Baltimore. They had some banners and signs that read, Save the Dinosaur, and they all marched up to the elephant house and paraded around. They said they were going to do 24-hour guard duty to protect the dinosaur. And then about 6 busloads of people from Richmond came in, and they all had banners, and they piled into the elephant house. And then there was a big crowd from Charlottesville. On top of that, a whole lot of people from Parent Teacher Association of Fairfax County arrived. They all had flags, and everybody's getting all tangled up, and the place is a madhouse. The giraffes don't know what to make of it. Don't worry, Holmquist, the doctor said. Just tell the giraffes that it's a demonstration of sound American principles, and everything's all right. Then he hung up, and we went on dancing around the desk. In a few minutes, the phone rang. It was Mr. Holmquist. What do I do now, Zemer? He said. There's a delegation here representing all the elementary school children of Arlington County. They have $217 all in nickels and pennies, and they want to give it to the zoo so we can buy the dinosaurs food with it. What shall I do about it? Accept it, Dr. Zemer said. And I suggest that you set up a barrel with a sign on it saying Contributions to Dinosaur Food Fund. Better make it a good-sized barrel, too. Well, by the next morning, things were really humming. They called up from the Senate office building and said that so much mail had come in that they were handling it with snow shovels. And the senators were all backing water as fast as they could, saying that they never really been in favor of the dinosaur bill at all. Up at the zoo, Mr. Hallquist was having a fit. He'd never seen such a crowd there before, and the elephant house had been jammed with people ever since opening time. 13 children had been lost by lunchtime. $1,800.43 had been put in the barrel last time they counted. Delegations had come from Warrentown Girl Scouts, the League of Women Voters of Casanova and Hagerstown and Chambersburg, and the United Boys Club of Bumpus and Beaverdam, Virginia, and the whole Brandywine Birdwatchers Society came, and the Mechanicsville Fife and Drum Corps, and the Citizens Committee for Secondary Schools from the Points of Rocks. It went on all day like that, and Dr. Zemer looked as pleased as Punch and kept on chuckling to himself. You know, Nate, he said, people are funny. Just think of all those thousands of people crowding into Washington to give all that money to our dinosaur. You think that a live dinosaur was the one thing that Americans wanted above everything else? And yet, if Senator Granderson hadn't tried to get rid of the dinosaur, none of those people would have given a hoot about it. I guess they don't get excited about a thing until somebody starts taking it away from them. Then they wake up and fight for it. It's just like fishing, isn't it? Sometimes you don't get a bite until you start to take in the line. Our last chapter, 17. Well, finally, I had to go home. I was having a neat time in Washington, but Mr. Jenkins said I would only stay out of trouble 4 weeks, and I could only stay out of school for 4 weeks, and my time was up. I went down to the zoo to see Uncle Beasley for the last time. And I scratched his neck with a rake the way he likes, and I said goodbye to him, but he probably didn't understand what I meant. He was getting to be awfully big, but he was still gentle and friendly with me. Mr. Holmquist said they'd take special good care of him, and Dr. Zemer said he would send me a bulletin every week about how Uncle Beasley was getting along. I was glad to have him in such good hands. Dr. Zimmer said goodbye to me at the station. Just before the train left, he gave me a fossil dinosaur egg in a special wooden box just to fit it. All of us at the museum thought you ought to have this to keep, he said, in return for what you've done for us and all the other scientists all over the world. Now, goodbye, Nate, and be sure to come back and see us again, won't you? You bet, I said. And and thanks ever so much, Dr. Zimmer. But then the train started, and all I could do was wave to him until he was out of sight. When the train pulled into Ashland, New Hampshire, there were Pop and Mom and Cynthia waiting at the station. When I stepped off the train, they all hugged me. Even Cynthia. I didn't mind though because there was no one else around the station agent and he there was no one but the station agent and he was eating his lunch and didn't notice. There was a kind of parade when I got back to Freedom and they had me ride down the street in the Champagne's truck. There was a big sign on the grocery store that said "Welcome home, Nate Twitchell" on it, and the school band played some music, all five of them marching together in front of the truck. The parade went all the way up to the schoolhouse, and Mr. Jenkins came out and very kindly handed me school books, even though I wasn't in any great hurry about them, and I could have easily waited until the next day. Then the parade turned around and came back to our house. As soon as the truck stopped, I got down because I felt pretty foolish up there with everybody looking at me, though I liked it too in a way. Mom and Cynthia had a table out in front of the house, and they served cider and donuts to the whole crowd. It was one of those terrific days that you get sometimes up here in October. The sky was so blue you could hardly believe it, and everywhere you looked, you could see all those bright red and yellow green leaves against the sky. It looked as if nature had put everything she had into making one really perfect day. Even the smells was perfect, a mixture of smoke from across the street and the dry smell of leaves on the ground, and the smell of warm grass and dirt in the sunshine. And just on the edge of it all, the faintest whiff of sweet cider. The excitement died down pretty fast, and the next day I went to school and I had to study subjects and predicates and fractions, just as if I'd never been away at all. And now one day goes along pretty much like the other, and there's not much excitement. There's plenty to do, though. What with the laying in the stove wood for the winter and taking care of the goat and chickens, it gets dark out by supper time now, and we sit around the stove evenings, and the warm feels good. Once a week, though, I get a letter from Dr. Zemer down in Washington. He keeps me posted on how Mr. Beasley's coming along. The latest letter, I have said that he was almost 20 feet long and weighed 13,900 pounds. The doctor said that Uncle Beasley was not growing so fast now, and that probably meant he wasn't a baby anymore, and he could take his time about reaching his full size. He still had another few feet to add to his length, Dr. Zima wrote, and another 3 tons to his weight, but he probably won't be full grown for 50 years, and he may live for 100 after that. If all goes well, your little pet will be an ornament to the National Zoological Park for a long, long time. He is eating well, about 400 pounds of feed a day, but we don't need to worry about the expense. Visitors have contributed $240,271.31 by closing time today, January 28th, and money is still coming in fast. Even if we have no more contributions from now on, the dinosaur bill is paid all the way through 1996. And if the Congress threatens to get rid of them, then you could come down and make another speech for us. So I guess the wonderful American dinosaur is safe for a while anyway. Well, I guess that's about the end of the story. After cold weather settled in, Pop suggested that I ought to write it all down in sort of a book, so I did. I wrote some every evening after supper at the kitchen table, and it used up the most tremendous pile of paper, and it was an awful lot of work, and I'm glad it's all over. Pop says I better not show it to Miss Watkins, or I'd be writing out spelling mistakes until I'm old enough to vote. Miss Watkins is my teacher, and she gets pretty worked up about spelling and commas and things like that. We never go on our camping trip to Franconia Notch, but Mom thinks maybe we could go to Washington during the spring vacation. I could show them all the sights, but most of the time I want to be at the zoo, keeping up my friendship with Uncle Beasley. And if you're in Washington, D.C. in the spring, and if you happen to go into the elephant house and look in the dinosaur cage and see a boy in there with a triceratops talking to him, maybe even riding on his back, you can be pretty sure the boy will be me. I hope you enjoyed the book as much as I do. See ya.